Proceeding will start shortly. The 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 pro-
Order, order. I call on Daniel Zeichner to move the motion.
Thank you, Sir George. It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair, and I beg to move on behalf of the Petitions Committee that this House has considered e-petition 232684 relating to banning non-recyclable and unsustainable food packaging. And let me start by welcoming both front benches, both my good friend and neighbour, the Honourable Member for Ipswich, and indeed the Minister, who, when I entered this place, was the cycling minister, as I recall, and since then has held a number of important positions. And I'm tempted to say that while we may be debating single-use plastics today, I'm sure there's no such thing as a single-use minister. And I wish the minister well when the recycling period comes round soon. And I wish them both success in their search for a solution to reusable packaging, which is a subject I'm very pleased to raise on behalf of the Petitions Committee. And I'd start, Sir George, by reading the petition into the record. And the petition reads, ban the use of all non-recyclable and unsustainable food packaging. Today, the Earth is at a crisis point due to our plastic consumption, and as a result, people in the UK are much more willing than ever to engage in recycling. Yet so much food packaging remains completely, frustratingly unrecyclable. Let's aim for the UK to lead the world with a 100% recycling rate. Every day, we send to landfill to decompose over thousands of years cereal box inner bags, peel-off film, fruit and vegetable punnets, ready meals, yoghurt pots, almost all plastic supermarket fruit and vegetable packets, crisp packets, sweet wrappers, chocolate bar wrappers, styrofoam, vacuum-packed plastic, to name but a few. The British public wants to recycle, but we can't get away from the vast amounts of waste that poorly designed packaging creates. Appoint people to design alternatives, and the UK will thank you. What an uplifting petition. So the sentiment, I think, behind it speaks for itself. It's been signed by 247,048 people, nearly 250,000 people, illustrating, I would say, the strength of feeling on this matter. And it includes nearly 1,000 from my constituency of Cambridge, where this is a matter of great interest and concern. And it's clear that the public mood around packaging, whether it goes to landfill or pollutes our oceans or rivers, has really changed over the last few years. We have woken up. There is genuine public recognition of the climate crisis, real concern over the natural destruction caused by non-recyclable waste. I'm sure others will mention this, but over 14 million of us watched David Attenborough's Blue Planet 2, which revealed the impact that waste is having on our seas and wildlife. While Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall's War on Plastic found UK plastic waste abandoned all the way away in Malaysia.
On that point, Madam President, give way.
I'm very happy to give way.
As a member of the Environmental Audit Committee, which the Minister was on at the time we had the inquiry, we heard from groups in countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, that they had UK plastic on their shores. Isn't it time that we actually stopped exporting plastic waste and reprocessed it all here in the United Kingdom?
Well, my honourable friend makes a powerful point, which I'm about to amplify on, that we have international responsibilities. He's absolutely right, of course. And as the public watched and listened and participated, it so grabbed society's consciousness that a Cambridge constituent wrote to me telling me there should be regular showings and re-showings of these programmes, as they are so convincing and powerful. I suspect in Cambridge they are re-watched on a regular basis already. Now, Attenborough calls plastic waste an unfolding catastrophe, and sadly the evidence backs this up. A report carried out by charities Tier Fund, Fauna and Flora International and Waste Aid has warned of a public health emergency, claiming that between 400,000 and 1 million people die each year due to preventable diseases linked to mismanaged plastic waste in developing countries. And these include diarrhoea, malaria, cancer, all of which researchers have linked to plastic waste building up near people's homes or being burned, which can result in damaging fumes.
My honourable friend give way?
Very happy to give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. I'm pleased that in my own local authority, Lewisham, recycling rate has rapidly increased in recent years, and there'll be a consultation just to continuing to look at barriers to recycling in the local authority. But I am also very aware that many local authorities find it very difficult to find a solution for certain types of black plastic and low-grade plastics. Would my honourable friend agree with me that if the government is to reach its status target of eliminated plastic waste by 2042, the Minister would need to better regulate the type of plastic businesses are using and do more to establish suitable sites for recycling?
My honourable friend makes a very important point. A couple of points which I will come on to and I suspect will be brought out in the wider debate. The black plastic issue, of course, is very real. One of the issues is making sure that actually across the whole country our recycling systems are consistent and can actually deal with these more difficult issues. But I would also say that I would just like to return briefly to the international significance of sometimes where our waste ends up, because the reports I was referring to earlier suggest that one person dies every 30 seconds due to diseases caused by plastic pollution in developing countries. And when one has a statistic like that, it brings it home to one, I think, just how significant this is. And what we do in our local recycling has global consequences. So it's not simply waste in the United Kingdom that we must consider, and our ability to recycle. I certainly will.
First of all, can I congratulate the Honourable Gentleman for bringing this forward, and the Honourable Gentleman probably is of the same vintage as I am, therefore he will remember fish and chips when they were a newspaper. Does he welcome the commitment by some chip shops and some fast food outlets to focus on paper rather than plastic, and that should be praised? But does the Honourable Member also agree that more focus must be put on those who package on online business to work with the Royal Mail as to determine what level of packaging will protect the goods as well as the environment? Chip shops and fast food outlets are doing their bit, but I think more can be done with the Royal Mail and online packaging.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for that intervention. I suspect we are already diverting into a whole range of issues here. I'm going to mention a range of examples. He got to me first on fish and chips. I am of an age that can remember fish and chips in newspaper, but I agree with him on that. But I think the point about the Royal Mail is not one that I was intending to make, so I think that's an important contribution that he has added to the discussion. Going back to the wider issues, what is clear to me is that the pressure for action on all these issues is growing from the public. We saw with the Extinction Rebellion protests, which have happened nationwide and were strongly supported in Cambridge, that these issues have now seized the public policy agenda. And the school climate strikes, which I have to say I found magnificent and uplifting, have inspired and show that the next generation really, really demand change. And I'm sure we've all got examples in our local areas, but on Friday I was at the Spinney Primary School in Cambridge and was impressed not just by the quality of the questions you get from young people on these issues, but they had held an Empathy for Earth Day a week or two before, and one again can see the enthusiasm that young people have. So we can see the public's desire for meaningful change. The question is, what can we do? And that, in one area, can start with the food that we eat. Because I believe that where options are given to people to avoid non-recyclable packaging, they can be very popular. And there are very good examples of this, and we've already begun to touch on some of these. Now, the Petitions Committee, and can I thank the staff of the committee for their excellent work on this, did a major survey, and they actually surveyed over 20,000 people on their attitudes to food packaging. For fruits and vegetables such as bananas, apples, potatoes and onions, over 99% of respondents said that given the option, they would choose to buy the items without plastic packaging. Almost everybody, in other words. Very large majorities also said they would buy bread without packaging, 94.6%. Breakfast cereal, 94.9%, and nuts and dried fruit, 97.1%, without plastic packaging. Nearly 80% also said they would choose to buy meat or fish without plastic packaging. So there is considerable public appetite for change. I'll come to some of the issues around these a little bit later. But last Friday, I took the Petitions Committee engagement team, and again I thank them for their work, took them and welcomed them to Cambridge, where we held a roundtable with various organisations working hard to improve sustainability in the way we eat and the way we live our lives. And in that discussion, I heard from owners of sustainable shops, cafes and businesses, such as BB Wraps, the organic reusable food wraps business, Cambridge Carbon Footprint to promote sustainable living, local resources and services, and Cambridge Sustainable Food, who focus on partnerships, projects and campaigns that capture the imagination and increase the sustainability of local eating. And it was a really illuminating discussion with many complex issues arising, such as the issue that inventing new types of potentially sustainable packaging does seem to be easier than putting into place the infrastructure and processes to deal with it. And there was a concern that there's a proliferation of new so-called sustainable packaging products and different recycling schemes. Jackie Sutton-Adam described the situation as we've broken all our eggs into a bowl, mixed them up, but haven't made the omelette yet. So while the government ought to be investing more in solutions and incentivising people to try new things, Irina Ankudiova and others believe that manufacturers should be required to show that a system was in place to deal with the waste before new packaging products were brought to the market. Certainly, very happy to give way.
A very important point about the packaging surrounding the goods that we're buying, but also, because I chair the APVG for the prevention of plastic waste, but also the goods themselves. We have weaned ourselves off natural products and fibres and onto plasticized products and fibres. Many of our clothes are polypropylene, many of our carpets are polypropylene. We are wrapping plastic in plastic, and that is a real concern. I think it's a whole big picture. Does he agree we need to look at the whole thing and have a shift back to more natural packaging and natural fibres within the packaging?
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Member. I think she makes a very powerful point. It's one I will touch on a little later, but I suspect that others will want to amplify it more. I have to say, when I look around the world, the way other countries have perhaps not gone quite so far down this path, I think some of their lifestyles are very attractive. Dare I say, some European lifestyles are very attractive indeed. So, George, on Friday I was also able to visit the Cambridge Cheese Company, who cycle their cheese deliveries around the city, present gifts in their recycled wooden cheese boxes, and I'm very grateful to a very helpful assistant in their shop, Jade Tiger Thomas, who showed me the amazing aforementioned BB Wraps and explained their scheme, which allows customers to bring their own Tupperware or reusable boxes to carry cheese home in, or reusable jars of olives and deli items. It is a long-established Cambridge gem, and many honourable members find themselves in Cambridge from time to time, and I thoroughly recommend that they make a visit. But this isn't an entirely new phenomenon, I have to say. A long time ago, when I was a student in Cambridge, I remember going to the legendary Arjuna Whole Foods and buying spices measured into brown paper bags. So this has been happening long before it became fashionable, and Arjuna has proved itself as a long-term Cambridge institution committed to sustainability and reducing food waste. And buying food without throwaway packaging is becoming increasingly popular across the country. At the start of the month, Waitrose started a trial in their Oxford Botley Road store of a new unpacked model with a dedicated refillable zone of products from wine to cereals, frozen pick and mix, and a borrow a box scheme. They also have refillable cleaning products and sell plants and flowers without plastic. Now, I think probably most of us have read the stories in the newspapers. It's too early to have solid statistics about the success of the trial, but Waitrose tell me that the reaction to the announcement of the trial was 97% positive on social media, and they sold out of some products within the first week of the trial. I was told that, quote, customers have brought into the concept readily. They arrive with their own containers ready to fill with the loose cereals, pasta, fish and more. This started to happen within just a few hours of us announcing the trial. And I have to say, it put me in mind of happy times passed in my life in places like Venice, where the wine shops are available for people to take bottles to get refilled on a regular basis. And now we can perhaps extend that to washing up liquid, even if it is slightly less enticing. So when these schemes are well advertised and communicated, and when efforts are made to help people get acquainted with these new ideas, such as the Borrow a Box scheme, for those who may have been unaware or not had their own, then behaviour and culture change is possible. And it can be done on a smaller scale too. Sheffield University Students' Union has its own zero waste shop, which sells a huge range of spices, herbs, grains, legumes, dried fruits and nuts by weight, so you can buy as much or as little as you need. You just bring your own container, buy one from them, or use one of their recyclable paper bags. Very willing to give way.
Thank my honourable friend for giving way, and thank him too for mentioning the University of Sheffield's Students' Union Zero Waste Shop. It's a well-established initiative, and I join him in celebrating the groundbreaking work that they've been doing over some time now. Yes. But would he also celebrate the work of the University of Sheffield's Grantham Centre for Sustainable Futures, which is looking at a range of approaches to eliminating plastic waste, recognising that whilst we should be doing everything possible to minimise the use of single-use plastics, there will be some areas in which that's difficult. So, for example, we need to explore the need for to see if there's the opportunity to reuse single-use plastics that are currently used by medics. And similarly, also with single-use plastic bottles, actually the carbon emissions of recycling could be more damaging than developing reuse. And those sort of areas are the innovation we ought to be looking at. Would you agree?
True to form, my honourable friend raises the more profound points in the debate, and of course these are exactly the trade-offs that need to be considered in depth and in detail. I will come on to some of them in a moment, but he makes very powerful points about the fact that sometimes the more obvious routes to doing the right thing may not have quite the consequences that one understood them to be liable to have. The argument I'm making at the moment, I suppose, is trying to encourage the zeal of the public to embark upon this path, and the conclusion I will draw at the end is that they need to be given help to make sure that they are indeed achieving the good outcomes that they are intended to do. But it is a subject littered with potentially difficult trade-offs, and I'm sure both front benches will make reference to those as we go through the debate. I will complete my tour of some of the great initiatives, or others may help me in a moment. I'm happy to give way.
I'm stimulated to get much on my feet from my honourable friend who is associated with Sheffield University, like I was some time ago in Sheffield Students' Union. One of the things I learned at Sheffield University was if you can't measure it and don't measure it, you're unlikely to make progress. And does my honourable friend agree with me that some of the government statistics are extremely dodgy in this area, particularly when it comes to recycling, because we assume when waste is exported that it is recycled, and that is unaudited. And the best way to deal with these things is, one, to deal with them domestically, and as my honourable friend from Sheffield Central says, rather than recycling, reusing things, bottles, glass bottles rather than plastic bottles is an obvious example.
Well, once again, my honourable friend introduces the gravity that I would expect of him to do, and he makes serious points here, and I'm sure others will refer in the remainder of the debate to the need to reduce, reuse and recycle in the correct sequence. And the measurement issue is a really important one. I'm trying to adopt a non-partisan tone in today's debate in the sense that I suspect we're all trying to get to the same place, but I think he makes a very fair point about the need to make sure the statistics upon which we're making decisions are reliable, and an even more important point perhaps in the sense that we cannot just export our waste and somehow pretend that that's not having an impact somewhere else. So my final resting point in my tour of great Cambridge places is the Cambridge's Daily Bread Co-op, who are launching their zero waste scheme this week. My point being that wherever we turn, we are finding people wanting to bring forward new and welcome initiatives. Which brings me, and I'm standing opposite the chair of the EFRA committee. I'm very grateful for being in the chamber this afternoon. They are undergoing, in the midst of an inquiry into food and drink packaging, which has allowed me the delight of reading through both their proceedings and their evidence, and I suspect he will want to comment on some of it. But what the experts that they've consulted tells us that while changes can be made, we must temper our enthusiasm with realism, because there probably isn't an easy answer or quick fix to this problem, because packaging does play a very important role in keeping food fresh and safe and affordable. So, although moving away from pre-packaged foods in shops and restaurants and cafes is probably possible, it does become more difficult and complicated when considering freight and production. Now, despite that, it does seem definitely possible to me to significantly reduce the amount that we use here in the UK. But it would be simplistic to assume that we can just transfer this way of producing and transporting food all over the world, for instance, when in some places there isn't yet the same level of technology readily available. And it is important to remember where the most environmental damage is being done. And in evidence to the EFRA inquiry, Peter Maddox from WRAP UK explains that when you look at a piece of meat, an 8-ounce beefsteak he describes in a package with a film on top, the carbon impact of the steak is over 100 times bigger than the carbon impact of the packaging. Now, that packaging is providing extremely innovative barrier properties, which enables that meat to last a lot longer. If you do not have it in that pack, that meat might last 3 days. If you have it in a really good sealable pack, it will last 10 days. So you then start thinking about what consumers want, reducing food waste and the fundamental economic value of that piece of meat. You need to think about it in terms of the whole product. And I think that's the message when I've read through the evidence that comes through loud and clear. The whole product, the whole life cycle analysis, that is the key. And we must recognise this as we continue our efforts to reduce non-recyclable packaging. There is so much we can do, but I do think it's realistic to admit that we cannot eradicate its use completely overnight. But we must not lose our ambition. The Royal Society for Chemistry, who are based in Cambridge, highlighted in their evidence inquiry that although bio-derived and biodegradable plastics will play a role in addressing the challenges caused by conventional plastic waste, they should not be used to legitimise a throwaway culture. They are not necessarily more environmentally benign than conventional plastics, and their impacts as a replacement for conventional plastics must be considered on a life cycle basis. And this suggests, Sir George, that despite technological advance, cultural awareness and change is still crucial, and the UK cannot absolve itself from responsibility for mass corporate and personal behaviour change just because technology is advancing. Now, at the round table in Cambridge last week, Sago Robinson and others were concerned that reducing non-recyclable plastic packaging was not necessarily compatible with the drive to reduce CO2 emissions. For example, it was said carting around loads of refillable jam jars would use loads of CO2. We weren't being very precise and measurable on this particular occasion, but I think we get the point. Alternatives to plastic packaging could, sadly, have far worse carbon footprints. For example, paper, steel, wood and glass. The two issues, plastic pollution of the oceans and carbon emissions, needed to go hand in hand, people said. They argued that recycling ought to be the last resort. People should be looking at using reusable containers for many years before thinking about the need for recycling. Now, continuing my spirit of generosity to the government, I've no idea why I'm in this generous mood, but I am. It is fair to say we have seen... Perhaps that's the cause. Perhaps I have some sympathy with their current travails. But we've seen some progress. The government has looked at banning plastic straws, drink stirrers and plastic cotton buds, but I fear it's been so far rather reluctant to introduce the fiscal measures that we do know now do work. The plastic bag charge was discussed over many, many years, but it's taken 15 billion plastic bags out of circulation. So imagine what proper fiscal incentives and taxes could do to change the way our society considers waste and how committed we all are to recycling. Now, the Drinkster announcements grabbed the headlines, but I have to say, I think we need to seize this moment to make, and I quote, the rapid, unprecedented and far-reaching transitions that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report called for back in October. And in their evidence, the EFRA Select Committee inquiry, the Green Alliance recommends moving away from piecemeal action and approaching plastic packaging and resource use in general in a much more systemic way. This means viewing plastic as just one resource amongst many used in our economy, all of which have environmental impacts of some sort. Happy to give way.
Does he also agree that perhaps maybe the general public need to have a good look at how they perceive foods to be? For instance, and I am always aware of this issue when it comes to the general public buying potatoes, for instance. What they want to see appears from Asda's and Tesco's and all the big superstores is a nice wee carton of half a dozen potatoes washed, cleaned and ready for the pot. Whereas what I suggest to you that potatoes is, I would know it, and I suggest that others would know it in this chamber, it's a half a 100 bag you buy from the farmer. As it is, you know something, that's real potatoes. Yeah.
I'm grateful for the intervention. I think this is leading us into a slightly broader discussion about people's view of the world. I have to say I rather hanker after a less homogenised culture in general, and certainly in the discussion we had last week, I do recall a time when we respected the seasons, didn't expect peppers to be available 365 days a year on our tables. It gave us something rather to look forward to, perhaps. So something in terms of the human spirit, perhaps, here, which we could be looking to. But, of course, we do know that for many consumers, the supermarkets will say this is what people want. And that is a dilemma we face. Returning to the Green Alliance, on the way home from the supermarket, the Green Alliance's overall recommendation is, to coin a phrase, go back to basics. Reduce the amount of unnecessary plastics used, reducing dangerous chemicals used, rationalise the number of polymer types that go into plastic production to allow us to improve recycling. A really important point, I think. All the time while in promoting systems for reuse and ensuring that we are using recyclable and recycled materials. And they argue that this requires a more strategic approach to infrastructure, not simply leaving it to the market. And I suspect this is where some of the political disagreements may emerge. And I have to say I very much agree with them. I hope the government, or wish the government, would accept that challenge and develop a framework which advocates genuine system change. Now, as the Honourable Member for Tiverton said, and I quote him when chairing the inquiry, reducing non-recyclable waste is, quote, going to be quite difficult to do, but it's how far we go and how wide we go. It is down to the big retailer as well as the consumer. It is going to be an interesting education for all of us, and I very much agree with him. And this, Sir George, is the point. In my view, we must take people with us rather than being punitive, which is why education and making change easy for people is crucial. Essentially, if we make it too much of a faff for people to change their behaviour, people will be turned off by it and won't do it. I believe people want to do the right thing, to be environmentally conscious, to live sustainably, but time and resources dictate that we have to make this the easy choice in a socially just way, not simply for those who can afford the time or money to change their consumption habits. And I hope the Minister will tell us later how the government may go about making this happen.
Question is that this House has considered e-petition 232684 relating to unsustainable packaging. Neil Parish.
Thank you very much, Sir George. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And also, can I say to the Honourable Member for Cambridge, thank you very much for getting this debate, and I think it's very timely. And thank you for the favourable quotes that you've made for the chair of the Select Committee. But seriously, I think we are very much on the same page, because I think we've got to reduce plastics, we've got to get more compostable plastics, but I think we've also got to be quite sensible in how we get about it. And let's use some carrots as well as sticks to try and actually persuade people to change their attitudes. So, like I said, I really very much welcome it. And of course, this is on the back of the petition for the use of, stopping the use of non-recyclable, unsustainable food packaging. I would be told off by my clerks if they were here if I sort of go into too much detail over what I think the committee might or might not decide at the end and when we've taken our evidence. But naturally, I will go through the evidence that we have taken so far. And what we really are seeing is that we can actually, I think, first of all, reduce a great deal of the plastics we first use, because then, whether they are recyclable or whether they are not, do we actually need the amount of plastic that we have? I mean, we've grown up, have we not? Many of us, but some here are younger than others, but most of us have sort of grown up gradually using more and more plastic until it sort of becomes, I can still remember glass bottles and things like that were, were recyclable, had deposits on them, Corona bottles and the like. I used to go around actually collecting them as a boy to try and, especially if they washed up in the river, and I could then get the deposit back on them. But, all of these things are useful because not only do people return them, but they also collected them as well. I mean, I was at an event last week where, Water UK, where actually we're going to having more fountains and making sure that we can actually carry a reusable water bottle around with us. See, millions and billions of plastic bottles are actually for mineral water. And I have to say to you, I think we've probably got some of the best, Sir George, some of the best water out of our taps, dare I say it, in the world. Do we actually need to have all this bottled water? It's become a sort of real fashion, really, and I know very difficult to tell people they're sort of out of fashion, but they may well be now if you've got so many plastic bottles, which are really unnecessary. I certainly will give way.
I'm grateful to him. Some time ago, I had lunch with Eddie Stober, and I may have got this figure slightly wrong because it was a long time we had lunch, but he said at any one time on the motorways he had 40 lorries, I think it was, carrying nothing but water. And that is an extraordinary waste of energy, both in making the bottles and, as the Honourable Gentleman says, we have high-quality water in virtually every corner of this country. So I've tried at different times to get the house authorities to use tap water and not bottled water. Does he agree with me that we could make a small contribution by not having bottled water at our committee meetings?
The Honourable Gentleman makes a very good point, and of course this House could lead by the fact that we have actually have bottled tap water instead of actually mineral water. Now, as a farmer and a previous dairy farmer, we all often make the joke really that you'd actually better off than milking cows actually find a spring on your farm and actually bottle that water, because you can actually make more money out of bottling water than you can keeping cows and having milk. And so, but fair enough if you really want mineral water. Perhaps some people need mineral water for health reasons and others, but we certainly don't need the amount, and we don't need to have it in plastic bottles. And of course, if we are going to have plastic bottles, then also let's make sure they are properly recyclable, because of course, some of the big, Pepsi-Cola and Coca-Cola are looking at the reverse vending machines. This is where you actually take the exact plastic bottle, put it back through the vending machine, you get a deposit, and you can then make another bottle from that actual plastics. But of course, only 70% of that plastic can be used, and you can only recycle it about twice. So everything that in this world that you look at, first of all, when you drill down on it, is not quite as recyclable and reusable as we actually believe it to be. I will give way to the Honourable Lady.
Just on the recycling of the bottles, I actually took the APPG to the Veolia recycling plant in Dagenham. And there is a problem that we have, is that a lot of the plastic cannot be used more than once. And also, they had empty machines because they need to feed those machines. So it is a dilemma. The more we take plastic out of the system, the more recycling becomes too expensive to do. It's something we have to think about.
Yes, the Honourable Lady makes a very good point, because, like I said, if you recycle plastics, you can recycle them, but if you recycle a whole mix of different plastics, you find you get a sort of very low-grade reusable plastic. And of course, there's another issue when you've got the compostable plastics. If you then actually mix them with the non-compostable, then you've got another problem, you see. So everything in life is not simple, and certainly, and like every inquiry one does, the more you look into it, the more complicated it becomes. Because I'm a practical farmer, and the one thing that I want to see is actually that we do really good by actually reducing the amount of plastics, having properly compostable plastics, and actually do something that actually works. Rather than, if we're not careful, you know, and all governments of all colours will actually, let's tick this box, we've recycled this, we've done that. Does it actually work? Does it actually improve the environment? And so that is the issue, because going on to compostable plastics, you see, you've got to be certain that they will properly decompose, so that you can actually, the molecules break right down, and that you can actually put them on, grow your plants in your garden, or put it onto your fields and grow your crops, and it doesn't still leave little tiny particles of plastic that haven't broken down. Now, most of it will compost, but of course it's got to be also composted. You know, if you take, I have this beaker here, Sir George. Now, if I put that in my garden with a whole load of beakers, right, and leave them together, that will never decompose, or it will take a very, very long time. If you then mix it with garden waste and other organic materials, and you can get the temperature up to 60 degrees, it will break down probably within 12 weeks to 3 months, 12 weeks to 6 months. So it can be done, and it will break down. They will actually break right down. But again, like I said, it's got to be done properly, and you don't want these mixing with plastic that is not compostable. So like I said, that's why the collection of plastics, the recycling of it. You know, we have local governments all over the country. You know, I was in local government before I came into this place, and we are fiercely independent. But of course, we've also got lots and lots of different ways of collection and recycling, and so on and so forth. And so this also, and I think the government's probably going to have to be braver on this issue and actually give more stricter advice to local authorities actually on how they recycle and how they have a similar system across the country. Otherwise, you know, you are, I mean, I haven't got really the patience like my wife has to sort of sort everything out into every little tiny thing. So, you know, I think you want to make it a little bit more idiot-proof for people like myself, dare I say, Minister. Don't smile like that, Minister. Because I was going to say something nice about you in a minute, but I may not now.
Farmer, the honourable gentleman should know that when you're in a hole, it's best to stop digging.
Yeah. Okay. I will, Sir George. I will carry on. I apologise. So, like I said, on the compostable, like I said, we've got to make much better public awareness. We've also got to make sure that we collect it separately and we don't actually mix it with plastic that's not compostable. I also think that if we were to bring in a tax at the source of making plastic, so that you have to pay a tax on it, I know it would raise the cost, but it would also mean that those plastics that are genuinely compostable, you could actually make them exempt, or you could give them a reduction in the amount of tax that actually put on that particular plastic. And I think that would make sure that the compostable plastics were then more competitive in the marketplace. And the Honourable Member for Cambridge has gone into quite a lot of detail about, quite rightly, about, you know, what do we need to wrap in plastic. I think when it comes to meat and fish and things that we actually want to keep for a long time, and we can improve the shelf life, because we don't want to waste food. That's the last thing we want. So, you know, as we throw the baby out with the bathwater, be just a little bit careful, because, like I said, we've got to make sure that we don't waste food. So let's make sure it's those vacuum packs, it's those things that are keeping longer life of food that we actually concentrate the plastics on. You know, other members have made the point, do we need potatoes, carrots, onions, all these things wrapped in plastic? Do we actually need, you know, individual bits of broccoli actually wrapped in plastic? You know, I mean, we've got to, you know, we've always got, when we go to the supermarket now, it's almost pre-digested and pre-eaten, isn't it, before we actually eat it, because it, you know, it's been prepared so readily. You know, we wash all our potatoes, our carrots, all these things, and then we put them in plastic bags. It's all very, very convenient. But, I mean, I was told, you know, as a boy, you've got to eat a peck of dirt before you die. Well, I think you'd have a job to eat a peck of dirt today, Sir George, because, like I said, that everything is so clean and washed. Because, you know, carrots and potatoes and all these root crops do actually grow in the ground, believe it or not, and they do actually get soil on them, and actually a little bit of soil. Well, I won't diverge too far, but, you know, there is iron in the soil. All of these things actually are all part of life. And I think, you know, without sort of getting too romantic and to reminisce too far, I just think that we can just look a lot more at how we used to eat our food. Not everything will work, and like I said, we will still need some plastics. Let's make them compostable. Then let's actually, you take cheese. Does all that need to be wrapped in plastic and sort of, again, sort of made of rubber and actually delivered to us? We could actually have some really good flavoured cheese that's done in a more traditional way and actually take it home, perhaps in some greaseproof paper or whatever. You know, all of these things. You know, do we need the paper? Do we need the plastic in all the cardboard packaging in strawberries, all of these things? Do we need it? I mean, the other issue we haven't looked at, but, you know, look at all the glossy leaflets that we have through the post. They're all plastic coated. Would it not actually be better, and I don't think we'd probably look at that into our inquiry, but, you know, when you start looking at things, everything that arrives, you sort of suddenly start looking at it with different eyes, don't you? And you get, I had one of the agricultural merchants sent me a whole thing to do with cattle drenches and goodness knows what, and it was all in a very glossy leaflet, all plastic coated. It's not necessary. In fact, you know, if we actually use something that sort of looks very much more old-fashioned print, actually put it on some proper paper instead of plastic coated, that actually might work a lot better than carrying on plastic after plastic. So I think the key, I will give way to
interest. We've all got used to seeing huge bales of hay in fields covered in shrinked plastic. Does he have a view on that?
Yes, I mean, of course, if the Honourable Lady could guarantee the weather, and so that we could make it all into hay, and we didn't have to wrap it, the silage, because it starts to rain and we need to wrap it, we could do away with a lot of plastics, and she's right, we could use less plastics. My issue with some of it, and I'm going to get myself into trouble with some farmers now, my issue more now is the amount of plastics actually in the fields used to growing crops, because the trouble is we're all chasing the early market, and I think sometimes actually we put more and more plastic down, and I do wonder whether that's right. And of course the key to the Honourable Lady's question seriously is that the plastic that's used to wrapping those silage bales does need, again, to be properly recycled. And I suspect we can also look at the type of materials that are used to make that, to make sure that that's probably compostable. But of course, again, you've got to be careful that the acids and the fermentation of the silage doesn't actually dissolve the wrapper as it's actually wrapped in the silage. But seriously, I think more could be done, and I think farmers will have to look quite seriously, and I'm sure the Agriculture Minister probably doesn't want to talk about that today, but it is probably something in the farming industry we really are going to seriously have to look at. So George, I won't carry on talking all day, even though I probably could talk all day on this particular issue, because I think, you know, seriously, it is a very important issue that the Honourable Member for Cambridge has brought up. But I think the real way forward now is for the government and for industry and for the consumer to actually look at everything we do, how we live, and say, can we carry on in roughly the same lifestyle? Do we actually need as much plastic? And if we've got that plastic, can it be properly compostable? If it's not compostable, can we make sure that it's properly recycled? Can we make sure that when we collect that plastic, we actually collect it in a way that that plastic is much more valuable to be recycled rather than actually to be into a very low-grade plastic? So I think there's a lot more we can do. I think the government does need to consider some taxation. I'm not a great lover in taxation, but I think there is a way now where we could tax too much use of raw mineral plastic made from oil and actually move people into compostable plastics. And let's actually make sure that I think in the future we lose half as much plastic, if not less than that. Most of it will be compostable, and most of it and the rest of it is genuinely recycled, and we can actually use it for very good purposes. Things like making plastic fencing stakes which would actually last forever rather than rot out. That's probably a use where you could actually use some of this plastic in a very good way and make good use of it. So there's lots of ideas out there. I look forward to what the Minister has to say, and the Shadow Minister, who is of course also a very good member of the Select Committee, and the Honourable Member for Scarborough is making and will make an excellent Agriculture Minister. Thank you, Sir George.
Thank you very much, Sir George. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this evening, and my thanks also to the Honourable Member for Cambridge for securing this important debate, and also to the Petitions Committee, I believe. Members, by 2050, circa some 34 billion tonnes of plastic will have been manufactured globally. And the waste from this may be shipped around the world and blight many countries that don't contribute to the waste, but host the waste. And that, I am sure, is quite a wicked thing that some countries impose on others. It seems inexplicable as to how we have come to produce and indeed rely upon a material potentially detrimental to our future. But indeed we have. A material that is allegedly cheaper to produce new than by recycling existing products. A material that, if subjected to fire, will in most circumstances give off a potentially deadly cocktail of toxic gases, and if discarded in watercourses, may continue to pollute our oceans. Neither of these outcomes are welcome. The UK Government has confirmed that its strategy, as part of its new 25-year plan to improve the environment, aims to eliminate avoidable plastic waste, a worthy aspiration. Having spoken previously in debates on this subject, I am very well aware bans on microbeads, straws, stirrers and cotton buds, together with plastic bag charges and refill facilities for plastic bottles, and may I commend Scottish Water for their promotion of these facilities throughout towns in Scotland. These will all eventually lead to positive impacts on the environment. However, Sir George, these actions alone are not enough, and we need to do much, much more. But from that beginning, I understand the UK Government is consulting on proposals to incentivise producers and retailers to take responsibility for the environmental impacts of the packaging that they currently choose to use. Added to that, the Government has committed over £60 million of funding for global research and to assist Commonwealth countries to prevent plastic entering the oceans. A constituent of mine recently highlighted to my office staff that receptacles have been placed on Turnberry Beach in South Ayrshire, into which the public can place plastic waste washed upon the shoreline. That's a good local initiative. I would also like to commend the local Rotary clubs in Ayrshire for their effective annual beach cleans, and I'm sure this goes on all over the United Kingdom, and I commend the work of Rotary clubs throughout the UK and Ireland. And these beach cleans which remove tonnes of potentially polluting plastic each year. And I'm happy, though not always there, when I can, I'm happy to join them on their Saturday mornings. I understand that another of this Government's aims is to work with retailers with a view to exploring the introduction of plastic-free supermarket aisles. Of course, as has been mentioned in previous debates, we must also bear in mind that other more traditional forms of packaging, glass bottles for instance, may have a similar cost to the environment in their production or transport, even if disposal and recycling can indeed be easier. As glass is heavier than plastic, its transport carries an increased carbon footprint. And as with all things, the packaging, it's a balance, it's somewhere in the middle. But at this moment, may I commend a local initiative whereby reusable glass milk bottles have been introduced by the Care family of Corton Farm near Ayr. And the customers there secure the glass bottles. They can go to the farm and secure for themselves fresh milk right from that wonderful dairy farm. And that, in turn, whilst you're getting the freshest of milk, you're also reducing the use of plastic bottles that are so commonly used for the conveyance of milk. In the meantime, I note in the media that Asda, like Waitrose, plans to make its packaging 100% recyclable by 2025. And it's encouraging that local primary school children, including those in my constituents in Girvan, and helped by Asda, to take part in a series of interactive activities to learn about plastic use and recycling. But the dangers of plastics are clearly being recognised by the younger generation, and with pupils at Belmont Academy in my constituents in Ayr recently taking part in the Full Cycle 2019 Connected World Challenge at Dumfries House Cumnock. And I'm pleased to report, and well done to them and their teachers, they received a Pupils' Choice Award. Well, certainly.
Thank you, General, for giving way. Can I say, you mentioned just a few moments ago the fact that people were moving towards milk bottles as opposed to plastic containers. There was an interesting article a couple of weeks ago, in fact it was on television in the Midlands, where more and more people are going back to the local milkman because they can actually get milk using bottles rather than containers. Would you not agree with me that's a good thing?
Aye, Sir George, I thank my honourable friend for introducing that intervention. Yes, exactly, it's a good thing. And many in this room, if not all, will remember the wee phrase on the milk bottle, and that was rinse and return. So, yes, it's a good step forward. It's a small step, but in the right direction. But the Choice Award was for their innovative project on plastic pollution, and I commend them for their efforts. And let us hope that the politics of plastic proceed with the same enthusiasm. We must not fail our future generations. This may be one occasion when we should, and it's been mentioned before, turn the clock back to the days of our parents and grandparents. They managed daily tasks to sustain themselves and their families without that same reliance on plastics. And fish and chips wrapping of that era has been previously mentioned, and we can all remember the days where they seemed to taste that wee bit better in yesterday's newspaper. Finally, is the Minister able to provide any update on the consultation that closed last month, and is able to confirm if the introduction of a new plastic packaging tax, as I understand, to be introduced in April 2022 is still on target? And finally, members, 250,000 signatories to the petition can't be wrong, and they have to be listened to. Thank you very much, Sir George.
And mine.
Thank you very much, Sir George. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today. I really wanted to participate in this debate today because it is very current, and I am chair of the APPG for the prevention of plastic waste, and I do want to put it on record that we cannot, as a society, turn back the clock. I recognise that there is a nostalgia for days gone past, but I really do believe that the public is going to struggle if we are trying to get rid of plastic altogether. So what we need to do is minimise plastic waste, reuse where we can, and ensure that plastic is not something that's become this throwaway, disposable, commodity that we even have chocolate with plastic toys inside. We have got addicted to plastic. I think it's that slimming down of the plastic agenda, but recognising that some things do need to be made of plastic is so important. I really want to stress that, because I think in our desire to be a bit messianic about our approach to dealing with plastic, we can, if we're not careful, go down a route, very like we did when we all embraced diesel cars, that we end up potentially swapping one problem for another. So we don't want to increase food waste. We don't want to potentially increase the amount of heavy bottles and things that are being transported around the country. What we need to do is really decide whether or not we actually need that packaging, not replacing it with something else that may be just as damaging in a different form. Now, St Albans cares deeply about these environmental issues. In fact, 464 people from St Albans did sign this petition, and I put on record that I am grateful for them doing that, because I think we all need to have the pressure put on us. And I happened to host with an event down on the terrace in the House of Commons with the Coalition for Global Prosperity, who are looking to try and take plastic out of the environment. And David Attenborough was the chief guest at this, and it was enormously impressive as that he was inspiring the audience in a way that no one else can. But the one thing he said, and it stayed with me, is that when he was a little boy, he can remember his science teacher saying to him, Boys in this room, you are absolutely at the cusp of something really exciting. We've had the age of stone, we've had the age of iron and steel. Now we have the age of plastic, and it never, ever will go away. And that's the Midas curse that we all have. It doesn't go away, so we have to decide how we come up with formulations that make it truly compostable, and also how we make sure that packaging isn't mixed packaging. I went to visit Tesco's in my constituency a couple of weeks ago, and some packaging is so mixed in its composition, it becomes very, very difficult. So the little windows that we have on sandwiches, the Pringles pack is, unfortunately for poor old Pringles, it is seen as one of the worst. Plastic at the end, metal at the bottom, and cardboard down the middle. It's this composite packaging that's something we need to tackle, and we need to ask ourselves, can we work any smarter on this to make sure that our packaging truly is compostable and be realistic? My honourable friend, former... I've forgotten his constituency. That's the one, Tiverton, lovely place. Mentioned about farmers and being concerned about this. I think we've actually gone so far away from natural products. I mean, I'm told by sheep farmers that it costs more to shear the sheep than the fleece was ever worth. And yet, not so many years ago, wool was an extremely valuable resource. Now we have plastic to put in insulation materials. We put plastic carpets on the floor because they're scrubbable and endurable. All the things we value about plastic are all the flip side of the plastic curse. So I do want to say that we need to look back at a lot of things to encourage the public to actually demand less plastic, because the plastic we can't see is often more injurious than the plastic we can see. And we can be virtuous about taking along our bottles and packaging that we can see to recycling and feel we've done our bit. But it worries me that people are washing their Polartec fleeces, sorry, that's a brand, but other brand. I know some of those have been made from plastic bottles now, but those sort of fleecy jumpers, or even our polyester clothes that we have, and all those are knocking off little bits of plastic into the environment, going into the seeds, going into our fishing, and making sure that it's absolutely being ingested by all the filter feeders and so on. Our beaches are littered with nurdles, little tides and drifts of coloured plastic. Plastic, because it is indestructible, so to speak. I know we've got some variations that are compostable now. It's been there for such a long time. We have a legacy of plastic. And that's what I would like the government to look at as much as anything. Legacy plastic is something that we have got from governments from years and years past. We, the modern age countries, have been the worst polluters. We have our plastic piling up on the shores and beaches and drifting around. And this was the David Attenborough focus, that he had this wonderful, the blue planet. And people think we can go along and scoop up the bottle that's floating there and that's the job done. The reality is much of it has become a soup that is very hard to remove. And this is what I would like us to see greater investment from our money that goes to international aid, is how we can clear up the soup that has been made from plastic from years ago. I'm all for a drive towards having a better environmental impact now, but we cannot, on the other hand, not take it into account. We need to rebalance the scales of the damage that we have all done over the years. And we've become a throwaway society. We throw away clothes that maybe have only been worn once. They've been produced incredibly cheaply. They're often wrapped massively in plastic as they come through the door. We're addicted to online retailing, which often comes with huge amounts of polystyrene around the more delicate items. We've got to start looking at the way we as consumers are shopping, the way we are living. And so I think this is a massively important debate, but it does start to make it like you feel your head's going to fall off. There are so many strands to the plastic story. But what I'm keen to do is that we don't get a silo mentality. So I applaud this petition for the genuine interest it has got in packaging. But what I've got to say as well is we've got to be looking at the composition of packaging. We've got to be helping businesses have a much better recycling rate. It seems perverse to me that in St Albans I will have recycling different boxes and cartons outside houses, but businesses have to deal with the waste themselves. We need to be having to incentivise the packaging that comes in to big companies so that they have a market for it. I, to my shame, and it's nothing to do with me, have one of the biggest waste tips for supposedly compostable and recyclable wood. The Apps Pond Lane has been a disaster over years because the wood that's put there, most of it has got plasticised paint on it. And as a result, there is no market for it. It has sat there, wet, rotting, catching fire when it sort of somehow exceeds its mountain of level that it's allowed. And all of that means that we are kidding ourselves when we put it on our doorstep and think that packaging is being dealt with properly elsewhere. The honourable gentleman that opened this debate mentioned the Tier Fund. I'm hoping to go to Bangladesh in September and do some work with the Tier Fund, because I know from my work I do in Bangladesh that they have an awful lot of plastic packaging out there, but they do not have a good recycling industry. We've exported our waste, we have not exported the technology for recycling. So I would like to see, when DFID is putting money into countries like that, that we are not just trying to stop the tide of waste, because I say there is so much legacy plastic. We've got to, if we go to those countries, you'll see, Sir George, rivers and lakes and beaches all polluted with plastic. And so we need to help countries to up their recycling, but we need to cut off our thirst and hunger for the plastic that is in our goods, our packaging, and indeed our legacy plastic that we as a society have put there. So I welcome this debate today. I think it's going to be the first of many. I think we have got to look at the way we have got ourselves addicted to plastic. And I think the words that Sir David Attenborough left us with at that particular event was that plastic is with us forever. It is. And so therefore we've got to think every time even the smallest bit gets thrown away, it is there somewhere. Just because it's not landing on our shores doesn't mean it isn't landing on someone else's. And so I'm really hoping today, Minister, that we are going to hear a joined-up thinking, weaning ourselves off plastic goods, gratuitous plastic toys given as freebies for small children that are having meals at particular restaurants, polystyrene foam wraps in from fish and chip places or other outlets. We've got to wean ourselves off plastic. But we cannot expect young mums to do away with disposable nappies. I met with the Nappy Alliance, and they are trying to get people to go over to less plasticised nappies. But we have got a huge amount of plastic that we've welcomed into our lives because it stops leaks, because it protects against things. And we've also got something I've been concerned about for years, is the amount of cling films that we use, some of whom are putting into the environment gender-altering phthalates, which are a real concern. That's why they think there is a rise of the hermaphrodization of fish, there's and so on. I think so much of this, our contact with plastic is huge. And I think at the future, we will see people saying, why on earth didn't they realise quite how injurious this was, not only to the environment, but for those people and human beings and animals and plants in the environment that are suffering as a result of plastic toxicity. So I'm hoping this is part of a joined-up debate, Minister, and I'm really hoping that we'll all be encouraged today to hear of lots of different avenues that are going to be open to us, not just picking up our plastic waste, but cutting off the stream.
Izzy Brock.
Thank you, Sir George, and a great pleasure to serve under your chairship. The Honourable Member for Cambridge mentioned that, or spoke of the mood of the public changing. He noted that. And I think this petition is testament to this. And the quality of the contributions today, I think, too, Sir George, have really shown that as well. There's been a great deal of passion and commitment to real change shown by the speakers in this debate, and I would like to commend everyone who's taken part for that. The Honourable Member for Cambridge also paid tribute to those programmes such as Blue Planet 2, which brought these problems home to each one of us, indeed directly into our homes. And he also mentioned the impressive work of the Petitions Committee staff with some 20,000 people surveyed. That is a huge number of people whose views we've taken into account with those figures. And it's given us some incredibly useful statistics, and I thank the member for listing some of those, and I look forward to looking up the rest of those particular statistics, because it was obviously a really valuable exercise. But it was interesting to hear exactly what packaging, or rather what lack of packaging, people are prepared to accept in remarkable numbers, it seems. He also highlighted what is something of a catch-22 situation, companies increasing production of genuinely recyclable packaging while we still lack the necessary infrastructure there to properly deal with it. Extra investment, I would suggest to the Minister, is urgently needed in that instance. He also raised a very useful point on remembering to consider the whole life cycle, that analysis of what is being packaged and how important it is to also remember that items need to be reused considerably more times before they are simply thrown away or indeed recycled. Member for Tiverton and Honiton brought back happy memories for me of hunting for returnable bottles and exchanging that extra cash for sweeties, I'm afraid to say. But he also called for an end to government box-ticking exercises and a proper appreciation of what is recyclable and for proper coordination between different local authorities. And I know certainly that is something that happens within Scotland as well, and I know the Scottish Government is keen to try and iron out some of the differences in recycling approaches there. He raised one of these recyclable cups, compostable cups rather, that are now in use here. It is perhaps worth pointing out for the record that these are for commercial composting. They're not really for household composting. And the company also provides a collection service to enable that, something I know because this company's HQ is located in my constituency, but more of them later. The Honourable Member for Ayr, Carrick and Cumnock mentioned the excellent initiative from Scottish Water, which I would love to see rolled out throughout the UK from different water companies, installing those once free, now free water fountains, but once free Victorian fountains that were so common everywhere. But these fountains are for residents and visitors alike throughout Scotland. And it's a pleasure to see them after so many of the older, mainly Victorian Victorian-style fountains fell out of favour. The Honourable Member for St Albans quoted David Attenborough speaking of the age of plastic that we should, as she rightly points out, remember was once very, very enthusiastically welcomed. But she also spoke of the flip side of the plastic curse. She mentioned nurdles and microfibres and many other things I've certainly become aware of through some of my beach clean-up days with the Wardie Bay Beach Watch in my constituency, but also other very serious legacy plastic issues that she called for government to address, to commit to actions to deal with that plastic soup, which is a phrase I think will stick forever in my memory. It's very unfortunate that we have to even think of such a thing. And for us all to show joined-up thinking that we should all be aiming for that truly circular economy. And she also mentioned cling film. I should probably also mention my mother still washes cling film and drapes it on the kitchen taps, and she's done that for many years. So she was a very early recycler. Now, Sir George, the phrase horrors from the deep took on another significance recently when a plastic bag was found in the Mariana Trench, along with sweet wrappers, of course, the deepest part of the world's oceans. And we also hear that there ain't no mountain high enough when 11,000 kilograms of rubbish, including plastic, was removed from Mount Everest. Still, it keeps your fruit clean, eh? The Honourable Member for Cambridge spoke of TV programmes that helped create the increasing pressure for action. The recent disclosure of nations in other parts of the world refusing to continue accepting waste from the UK, and plastic waste in particular, also brought that issue bang up into the public consciousness. Many of us, I'm sure many of us here, had a wee muttered profanity of relief as we realised that it was being laid out clearly in the public agenda. Hooray indeed. But it must not be a press story that's here today and gone tomorrow. No surprises, perhaps, when that we were foisting our problems on countries we regard as developing while we think of ourselves as developed, to our shame. No surprises either that we're happy to leave it to someone else to clean up after us. And no surprises, perhaps, that we didn't think about the consequences before we made the mess either. The sheer volume of waste that cannot be recycled and represents a hazard to other life on this planet is as mind-blowing as the scale of our idea that it can simply be swept under the global carpet. The task of cleaning up this mess, the job of getting some semblance of order back in it, is of a similar order to the task that sending people to the moon must have seemed when Kennedy made that declaration in Houston in 1962. We need to have a similar belief in our ability to achieve as well. We need to think that it is not only necessary but also within our reach, not only possible but desirable. We have to set our collective human mind to the task of setting right what we have made wrong. I don't think anyone yet has all the answers, but at least we've started asking the questions. And we need to clear the backlog of waste we've created, but we need to do more to stop creating the stuff in the first place. I find myself going back and forward between praising supermarkets, as some have done quite rightly today, for developing some products and packaging that can be composted or at least recycled, something that at least might be biodegradable, those moves in the right direction. I go from there to thinking that if they spent a fraction of their advertising and promotion budgets on it, we might see some real differences. Now, since each of the supermarkets all watch the other supermarkets and twitches at the least possible movement, smart supermarkets finding a way to market some real moves to sustainability would not only gain a commercial advantage, which they'd keep, they would trigger a chain reaction in the other supermarkets. And it's good to hear the first somewhat tentative steps are being taken and that opportunity finally grasped. But it is not enough to simply find ways to use a bit less packaging. Where packaging is desirable or necessary, we should make sure it doesn't cost the future. Make the packaging sustainable, recyclable, biodegradable, properly biodegradable, even better. In my constituency, as I referred to previously, there is a company called Vegware. It produces packaging for foodstuffs that, as you can see, you might take for plastic, but it's not. It's made from plants, and you can recycle it with food waste where it composts, commercial composting, yes, but that becomes nutrients for plants. It is a virtuous circle that is simple and rather beautiful. Vegware has only been in business since 2006, but it has operational bases in the UK, the US, Australia and Hong Kong, and distributes throughout Europe, the Middle East, South America and the Caribbean. It has corporate clients the length of the UK, and indeed in this very Parliament, Sir George. It's demonstrated on-site composting at Dundee and Angus College that produces horticultural compost from waste in just 2 weeks. It is showing the way forward. And that's not unusual in Scotland either. The Scottish Government is showing leadership within the restricted scope for movement it has. The deposit return scheme is coming in Scotland, and I am delighted to see it. I have often wondered why there's been so much attention on plastic straws, important though that is, and not enough on plastic bottles, as the chair for the EFRA committee referenced. Especially when you can get compostable straws from Vegware, a company in my constituency which I may have mentioned previously. Scotland's recycling rates are high. More trees are being planted each year, and communities up and down the country are taking action. I mentioned Wardie Bay Beach Watch. I'll also mention the fantastic Leithers Don't Litter, a completely voluntary organisation that has been making a huge difference to the Leith community with their clean-up days for years now. Particular tribute to Jerry and Zhuzga Farrell, who have been utter champions in this regard. School children have become the environmental activists that our generation failed to be, and the future is brighter than it might have been as a result. It's not enough. Much more needs to be done, and governments need to go beyond strategies, plans and visions to some actual actions. So I will be delighted to see the Minister getting on with it. Thank you.
Sandy Martin.
Thank you, Sir George, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Sir George, I would like to thank my honourable friend, the member for Cambridge, for his excellent speech in introducing this debate. As he says, the public determination to deal with the scourge of plastic packaging is overwhelming, and MPs and the government need to take heed of those concerns and act now. I would also like to thank all the honourable members who spoke and intervened, and I'm delighted that there was a very high-level agreement across parties on this issue. And I'd like to pick out a few points that were made by some of the honourable members, in particular the honourable member for Lewisham East, who pointed out that any recycling solutions which we introduce need to be able to fit with local authority capabilities. The honourable member for Leeds North West, who pointed out that there is no point in us trying to prevent plastic pollution in this country if we do not manage to do so and pollute other countries and the oceans in those other countries. And of course the substantial interventions or speeches from the honourable member for Tiverton Honiton, who made the very strong point that we can reduce plastic packaging. It's eminently achievable, but we need to ensure that the correct plastics are treated in the correct way, and also made the case for a coherent national system, a case which I very much agree with. The speech from the honourable member for Ayr, Carrick and Cumnock, who pointed out the importance of enabling communities to combat plastic litter, and from the honourable member for St Albans, who pointed out that we need to recognise the difference between unnecessary items and items where plastic packaging is a sensible solution, and the importance of making sure that compostable plastic really is truly compostable. Sir George, the petition calls for an end to non-recyclable and unsustainable food packaging. It then goes on to call for a 100% recycling rate. My honourable friend, the member for Cambridge, made the point that it is not enough to call for packaging to be recyclable. It has got to be actually recycled. Virtually every form of waste could be recycled if the public were able to separate it out, if the local authorities were able to collect it, if the plant were there to process it, and the manufacturers were willing to use the resulting recyclate rather than cheaper raw materials. Some materials clearly are more easily recycled than others. When materials can be and are being recycled, then people need to know that. But it makes no sense to allow manufacturers to claim that a package is recyclable when they know that the facilities do not exist to recycle it, or even less so. I'd be delighted.
Think about my Apspon Lane heap of wood. There's got to be a market as well. There's got to be an incentivisation to use the recycled goods, because otherwise it becomes a valueless commodity. It might be recycled, but nobody wants it.
The honourable member is exactly right, and this is clearly an important part of the entire cycle of recycling. There is no point in allowing them to claim that a package is recyclable when they know the facilities do not exist, or even less so when the cost of doing so would be ridiculously prohibitive. For instance, it is theoretically possible to recycle the traditional crisp packets, but I believe it currently costs more to recycle a crisp packet, taking into account the collection costs, than the original cost of the packet with the crisps in it. The government's strategy paper, Our Waste, Our Resources, does acknowledge this to a certain extent, but it does still refer to targets to making packaging recyclable. And so my first ask of the Minister is whether the government will measure recyclability in future by whether the material is actually recycled or simply as a theoretical claim by industry. My second ask to the Minister is whether the government will consider a graduated tax on plastic packaging rather than simply a flat rate tax on packaging that contains less than 30% recyclate. Many manufacturers are already pledging to move well beyond 30% recycling recycled packaging. And I would submit that any regulation which aims to persuade people to do less than they are already voluntarily doing is either pointless or window dressing. Major multinational companies such as SC Johnson, the American cleaning products company that makes the EcoVare brand, amongst others, are already aiming for high percentages of recycled material in all their packaging, and it would be a travesty if the 30% flat rate allowed other less ambitious companies to undercut their prices simply because the tax regime did not incentivise higher rates than 30%. The plastics packaging industry makes various claims trying to minimise the perception of their impact. Plastics do not make up the majority of waste measured by weight, but neither the climate change impact nor the pollution impact of waste are dependent on weight. Yes, of course, we want a sustainable solution for construction hardcore, but the environmental impact of a tonne of inert mixed rubble is negligible in comparison to the enormous problem that would be represented by a tonne of polystyrene foam or a tonne of polythene bags. The feedstock for most plastics is still fossil fuel, and the absolute necessity to eventually bring to an end the consumption of fresh fossil fuels, if we are to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, has to include an end to the use of fossil fuels to create plastics as well. The industry proudly insists that 78% of plastics are currently recovered, but of course that mainly refers to recovery through incineration in energy from waste plants. The exact efficiency of the electricity generation in energy from waste plants varies from plant to plant and also obviously dependent on the actual mix of waste being incinerated. But we can be sure that plastic incinerated in an energy from waste plant will generate significantly less electricity than the oil it was made from would have done in a conventional oil-fired power station. We don't use oil-fired power stations anymore, as a rule, because of their unsustainable climate change implications. How much more unsustainable, then, is it to incinerate plastic in an energy from waste plant? So my third ask of the Minister is whether the Government has any plans to ensure that the proposed extended producer responsibility for packaging production will be simply allowed to subsidise more energy from waste plants, or whether the Government has any plans to ensure that the money is used to incentivise recycling instead. As the petition makes clear, the public wants to be able to recycle their packaging, but clearly the very best way to deal with unwanted plastic waste is to not create it in the first place. The member for Cambridge mentioned all sorts of imaginative ways in which mainly small retailers are avoiding the use of plastic packaging, all of which are laudable. But we need a consistent across-the-board step change in the way we purchase goods, the way packaging is designed, the materials it is designed from, and the way it is dealt with at end of life. And only a coherent national strategy from government can achieve that. So my final ask of the Minister is this: will he pledge to ensure that all the good intentions, all the suggested actions, all the aims and targets in Our Waste, Our Resources are actually pursued, are accelerated where possible, and are not shoved into the long grass under the next Prime Minister? Sir George, dealing with our waste will be a crucial part of our ability to deal with the environment and climate emergency which we face. We need to reduce the amount of waste we create. We need to reuse our packaging wherever possible and recycle or compost what is left if we are ever going to achieve zero net emissions by 2050 or stand any chance of maintaining any quality of life on our planet for ourselves or any other creatures.
Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Food.
Thank you very much indeed, Sir George. Now, I would like to start by thanking the honourable member for Cambridge, a city that leads the world in so many ways, including cycling, for securing this debate, as it comes at a significant public interest in plastics and concern about their environmental impact. Plastics used in food packaging, which generates a considerable amount of waste plastics, is a great concern. The number of signatories, almost 250,000 to this e-petition, is testament to the concern of the public, and I welcome this debate on this issue, not least because, as I was so involved in this issue as a member of the Environmental Audit Committee. In fact, I think, having heard the contributions around the Chamber, I think we're all pretty much on the same page, and I hope I'm paying my honourable friend opposite a compliment when I say I could happily have read out his speech. The Government shares the public's concerns about the environmental issues surrounding plastics and has set out ambitious plans to address the problem. Where plastics cannot be prevented or reused, they should be recycled wherever possible. However, managing plastic waste that cannot be reused or recycled is complex and depends on a number of factors, including the type of plastic, the overall environmental impacts of landfill and the efficiency of energy from waste facilities. It's not just government-led initiatives that can push this agenda, but also consumer-driven progress in places like Sheffield and Cambridge, as we heard. And indeed, I was thinking about the meal I ate last night, and both the spinach and the strawberries were actually picked in the garden without any need for packaging at all, and the potatoes were in a paper sack, a 25-kilogram sack from a farm less than 10 miles away, not using any plastic, and indeed the beef was produced on the same estate where we live. Meanwhile, bans and restrictions on international export markets for waste, such as China's bans on typical types of paper waste and plastics, present us with a longer-term opportunity to focus on the quality of recyclate we provide and to ensure that there are end markets for this. The Government has therefore set out ambitious plans to address the problem of plastics. A key commitment in our 25-year environment plan is to eliminate all avoidable plastic waste within 25 years. And for the most problematic plastics, we want to be moving faster. In our Resources and Waste Strategy for England, published last December, we commit to work towards all plastic packaging placed on the UK market being recyclable, reusable or compostable by 2025. I should stress that we currently have no plans to ban the use of food packaging that cannot be recycled. Most food packaging is technically recyclable, though the current market does not make all recycling economic viable, as we've heard. Our general approach is to help people and companies make the right choice and develop alternatives, rather than move to banning items outright. April 2020, in England, there are circumstances where a ban is appropriate for a wider strategic approach. We've already banned the inclusion of plastic microbeads. Members might also be aware that we're banning the supply of plastic drinking straws, stirrers and plastic stem cotton buds from April 2020 in England. Meanwhile, the European Commission has recently published its Single-Use Plastics Directive, which includes a ban on cups, food and beverage beverage containers in takeaway packaging made of expanding polystyrene, and all products made of oxo-degradable plastic, as the Honourable Member for Tiverton-Honiton pointed out. We'll, of course, consider this requirement in the context of our work on eliminating unnecessary plastic waste. However, in the case of food packaging, we are of the view that alternative measures would provide strong incentives for businesses to move away from using packaging that is unrecyclable or environmentally damaging and towards more sustainable packaging. We therefore made a commitment in our resource and waste strategy to reform the current producer responsibility system as an immediate priority in order to financially incentivise producers to take greater responsibility for the environmental impact of their products. Our priority is to prevent or reduce waste in the first place. The current system already requires businesses to ensure that all their packaging does not exceed what is needed to make sure their products are safe, hygienic and acceptable for both the product and the consumer. These regulations apply to those responsible for the packing or filling of products into packaging and those importing packed or filled packaging into the UK from elsewhere. It is a market-based system and it has succeeded in ensuring that the UK has met its wider packaging recycling targets at the lowest cost to producers. The UK has reported to Eurostat that 64.27% of UK packaging waste was recycled in 2018, surpassing the 55% recycling target set in the European Directive. However, the current system does not sufficiently incentivise design for greater use or recyclability, and less than a tenth of the cost of managing household packaging waste is covered by producers. In February, we published a consultation setting out our proposals for reforming the current system. And this was one of several government consultations published on overhauling the waste system. These included a consultation on introducing a deposit return scheme for drinks containers and increasing consistency in recycling collection. And indeed, we look forward to drawing lessons from the Scottish experience in this regard. We also consulted on introducing a tax on plastic packaging containing less than 30% recycling content. The proposal is that the tax would work to apply to all plastic packaging manufactured in the UK and plastic packaging imported into the UK with less than 30% recycled content. The tax will be charged on plastic packaging that manufacturers place on the market, and the consultation sought views on the precise tax point. Imported unfilled plastic packaging, i.e. packaging that doesn't yet contain goods, would be taxed when it is released onto the UK market, and unfilled plastic packaging that is exported would not be chargeable. The tax will be charged at a flat rate per tonne of packaging material. It is planned to introduce that tax in 2022. And indeed, in their consultation, the Treasury have asked whether the tax should be a flat rate, i.e. 30%, whether it should vary for different purchasing formats, or whether the threshold should increase over time. The proposals on reforming the packaging producer responsibility regime tie together the broader set of principles for extended producer responsibility, including our resources and waste strategy, and our ambitions for the packaging sector going forward. These include the reduction of unnecessary packaging, the reduction or elimination of materials that are difficult to recycle, such as those composite materials like coffee cups, which are a cardboard material with plastic applied to it, and the increased recycling of packaging waste. A key proposal is that producers fund the net cost of managing the packaging they place on the market once it becomes waste. This creates an incentive for companies to use less packaging, as it will reduce their costs in complying with the regulations. A further proposal includes adopting approaches to incentivise producers to adopt recyclable packaging along the way. Sir George, in concluding, I'd like to stress that the Government sees the elimination or avoidance of plastic waste as a priority, and indeed we look forward to making further measures to make this country greener still. We're already the greenest government ever. We plan to build on that. I'll allow a little bit of time for the honourable gentleman to respond. Thank you very much indeed.
I'm grateful to everyone who's contributed to the debate. I think it's been an interesting and useful debate conducted in a positive and constructive spirit. I think that the contributions from all the front bench speakers were very, very welcome. I was particularly enthused by the chair of the Select Committee with his passion for change. I was very much taken by the member for St Albans with her talk of a plastic calamity, a crisis. But I'll just finish and conclude, Sir George, by returning to the petitioners, because when they say the British public wants to recycle but can't get away from the vast amounts of waste that poorly designed packaging creates, they're putting out a plea to us to get this right. So when they say appoint people to design alternatives, I'm not quite sure who they have in mind, but if we do get it right, their final line, the UK will thank you, is something which I think we could all agree with. But I will just end on a slight note of difference in the sense that I don't entirely agree with the Minister that we're in exactly the same place on this. I suspect in the end, on this side of the chamber, we are a touch more interventionist, in fact, much more interventionist.
Can I take the slightly unusual step from the Chair of saying that I think a subject that's hugely important to the people we all represent has been covered so well that I'm hugely impressed. I don't think there was a single word in any speech made by anybody on whatever side of the House that was wasted, and it's been a privilege to chair this debate. The question is that this House has considered e-petition 232684 relating to unsustainable packaging. Many of that opinion say aye, with some enthusiasm. Aye. And no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.
The proceeding has ended.